So the last time we spoke of verse 1.2, so yoga is the stilling of the changing states of the mind. Yoga chitta vritti nirodha. So what happens when the mind is stilled? What happens when the mind is stilled is tada drashtu svarupe vasthanam. Tada drashtu svarupe vasthanam, which means then the seer abides in its own nature. When the goal of yoga is attained, when the mind is stilled, in other words, yoga equals the stilling of the mind. When the mind is stilled and when yoga is attained, then the seer abides in its own nature. So in order to understand this, we need to know the metaphysics, the knowledge of reality or the theory of reality of this school of thought, of the school of thought of yoga. Metaphysics meaning there's a chair here, there's a board here, there's a glass window over there. This is my reality, this is what I'm experiencing, this is matter. Is there something that is beyond matter? Is there a soul? Is there a consciousness? What is there that constitutes reality? That's the study of metaphysics. We're trying to understand what is reality, what are we experiencing, how are we interacting with it? That's metaphysics. So in order to understand the seer abides in its own nature, right? We have to understand that in yoga, there is the seer. The seer, all it does is it sees, it observes, it is detached, and it just observes. It is eternal, which means that it has no beginning or no end. No beginning or end. It always has existed and always will exist. It is unchanging, because that which is eternal is unchanging. Doesn't change. No changes whatsoever. No manipulations within it. And some argue that it is pure happiness. Pure bliss. Some argue that, some don't. We'll go into that later. This, the seer or the observer, drashtu here, is our true nature. Every animal, every human, every species possible, anything that has life is this, the seer. This is separate from the body and the mind. The body and the mind are material. Remember, the mind is so subtle, we talked about it, the chitta is so subtle, it's material. And the body is made of the same stuff as the mind. It's still material, but it's more gross, it's bigger. So here we have the seer, and then we have the body and the mind. So this division is actually called Purusha and Prakriti. We'll go into this division later. Purusha and Prakriti, consciousness and matter. But here, so our true nature is the seer. So the verse is saying the seer will abide in itself when yoga is attained. So therefore, when yoga is not attained, there's something blocking the seer from abiding in itself. There's some problem going on. There's an obstacle. And so what exactly is happening is that there's a material mind. And the seer is observing through the material mind. And the material mind has fluctuations in it. So this is our mind. Our mind has constant thoughts, feelings, emotions, etc. The true nature, or the seer that exists within every being, including ourselves, is being absorbed through the mind, which we'll see in the next verse. But when this mind is stilled, when we achieve the state of yoga, then the seer no longer sees through the mind. The seer abides in its own nature. The seer abides within its own self. And that is liberation in yoga. Otherwise, we'll see in verse 1.4, the seer is caught up in the changing states of the mind. So currently, all of us, unless we're yogis and we're meditating, we're all caught up in the fluctuations of the mind, of our minds, and also with the sense objects. We see something, we want to go get it. We see status, fame, honor, material objects, money, women, whatever it is, we go after it. And that's because consciousness is observing. Our consciousness is just observing, but the mind is making it do this. because of desire and aversion. We'll understand that after. But understand the dichotomy between Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha being consciousness and Prakriti being the material reality, material world. And our consciousness, our true identity is Purusha, which is eternal, which is happy, which is unchanging, and that is our true essence. It observes. It just observes in a very detached manner. And attached, surrounding the Purusha is the body and the mind, the material body and the material mind. And so what happens is when the goal of yoga is attained, tada drashtu swarupe vasthanam, then the seer abides in its own nature. And that is the goal of yoga. So we'll go into verse 1.4 and we'll see what happens when people are not attaining the goal of yoga.